I'd like to introduce our special guest. He actually needs no introduction. It's a huge privilege for UKWA to welcome a real big hitter from the world of broadcasting. Please welcome broadcaster, historian and TV presenter Andrew Marr. So Andrew, we're using words like uncertain times and interesting times. This is pretty much extraordinary times, isn't it? Have you seen anything as extraordinary as this in your illustrious career in broadcasting?
No, I haven't. I came in when Margaret Thatcher was putting forward the Thatcher Revolution, and I followed the fall of Margaret Thatcher and the rise of New Labour and John Major and Maastricht and all of that. But this is bigger than anything. This is the biggest change in the country's destiny since the Second World War, I would say. And my first thought about Brexit is that actually this is a fork in the road for this country which can't be dodged. And we have a choice ahead of us. We've had a choice for 2 years. We have been smothered in anaesthetic verbiage trying to persuade us that the choice is not as stark as it is, but it is stark. And probably this very week at Chequers, the Cabinet is going to have to decide which way to go. Are they going to turn towards Europe and keep us close to the customs union, close to the single market, so that life carries on a bit as it was before, except that we don't have any votes, so-called Brino, Brexit in name only? Or do we actually turn our backs on all of that and take the very big gamble, and who knows what will happen, and go out and try and negotiate a free trade deal with Donald America First Trump? That is the choice. And for 2 years we have been told that is not the choice, but it still is, and very soon now we are going to have to take it as a country.
So where do you think the mood of the country is right now? And is there any chance of the country getting a say in this in some way, shape or form? Have the goalposts at all moved on where we were at the time of the referendum?
Well, I feel a little bit personally bruised by this, because I would have assumed that the country would be watching the Andrew Marr show every Sunday very closely, and therefore opinion would be jumping all over the place. But the truth is that really public opinion has hardly moved at all. There is a slight move, a slight nervous move against Brexit, but it's pretty small. And it suggests that had we run a second referendum now, we might get exactly the same result. I think there is about 20 to 25% of the political class, by which I mean parliamentarians, political journalists, civil servants, lobbyists, who don't really accept the referendum, who think that it was bogus, that the money behind it was dodgy and Russian and all the rest of it, and would basically hope that either the parliamentarians or the courts or somebody would just stop the whole thing. That I think personally, and I'm not allowed to give personal opinions, but I'll give this one. I think personally, if Parliament or somebody else stopped Brexit now, I think there would be blood in the streets. I think people would be absolutely outraged that we had had a referendum and it had been stopped and prevented by a small group of people in London. So I think the great likelihood is that we go ahead with this. There is not going to be a second referendum. I don't see either party leader calling for one, and I don't think the votes are quite there in the House of Commons for it. And I know Alistair Campbell would blow a gasket if he heard me say so, but there we go. That's just something we'll have to live with. So no, I think we are going to leave the EU in March next year. What that actually means, however, is still to be decided, and it may be decided this week at Chequers.
Yeah, what do you think's going to happen at Chequers? I mean, there's a number of us here that are involved in all sorts of kind of steering groups and consultation groups at the civil servant level at the moment, but we're all gagged by NDAs and non-disclosure agreements. We can't talk to our members about these discussions that are going on. It's a total one-way street of sort of information drawing from the industry. I mean, I would say actually that, to be fair to the civil servants in this instance, they've engaged with industry pretty well, but we're all victims of the politics, and until this divided cabinet gets united, surely there's no way forward. Do you think that's achievable over the next 2 days at Chequers?
I think it is. It's a fair statement that almost everybody acts first in their own interest, and Theresa May knows that if she takes a decisive step towards the soft end of the Brexit scale, or towards the hard end of the Brexit scale, she may lose ministers, she may lose her own position, and the entire government could fall, which is why she appears so frozen. And as I say, spewing out these huge foaming arcs of anaesthetic language about red, white and blue Brexits and wide and generous agreements to be struck, the details of which are entirely obscure. I think she is going to have to go one way or the other, and I think all the indications, all the briefings right at the moment is that she is heading towards a business-influenced, softer end of the scale Brexit. She wants us to stay very close to the single market for goods at least, and close to the customs union with this new, slightly obscure customs arrangement or customs friendship or customs flirt or whatever it is. Somehow we're going to be very close without being actually inside it. That is her preference, and I think that is driven very much by the messages she's getting from Philip Hammond and business generally, the Treasury, all saying that to do anything else would risk a really serious downturn just ahead of a general election, puts Jeremy Corbyn in power for quite a long time, and we don't want that, do we? They say. I hasten to add. So I think she is heading for that. And in a sense, she is saying to Boris Johnson, Michael Gove and Liam Fox, and the other hard Brexiters, really? You're really going to resign on this matter? You're going to resign because the Conservative Party, the party of business, is listening to business and trying to avoid a downturn? Well, jog on. If that's what you want to do, I dare you to do it. She won't put it quite as bluntly as that, but there is a feeling in the party that perhaps the European Reform Group, Jacob Rees-Mogg and all those guys have slightly overplayed their hand. If I can say one more thing about this, I think what she is doing is the equivalent at the moment of a very clever judo move, where she is using her own weakness to upend her opponent. Her own weakness in this case is the parliamentary numbers. She knows there is no parliamentary majority for hard Brexit. There is no parliamentary majority for a no-deal exit. There is no parliamentary majority for a WTO rules-only exit from the EU. And therefore, she is saying to the likes of Boris and the rest of them, David Davis, either you go my way, it's compromising and it's complicated and you don't like it, or this will end up back in the House of Commons for them to decide. And far from getting what you want, they will go for some kind of ESA or associate membership of the EU, and it really won't be Brexit at all. So if you don't like what I'm proposing, I dare you to go back to the House of Commons and make your case, because you know you're going to lose.
So are you saying... Sort of paraphrasing what you said, Andrew, that sounds to me as though you're sort of saying it's typical kind of Conservative Party, when backs are against the wall, we'll just rally round for the good of the party. Is that what's going to happen here?
Well, I think the Conservative Party faces a split come what may, because there are people in the Conservative Party for whom this is an absolutely existential, ideological matter. We have to leave the EU properly and fully and absolutely to regain our parliamentary sovereignty. That's what this is all about, and any compromise with that is completely unacceptable. And if they really think that, then they are going to have to break away from the colleagues who say, we are Conservatives, we live in the real world, we live in the world of business and balance books and money making and employment, and we have to stay in that world first, and we have to go with the prosperity of the country first. A lot of people have talked about the repeal of the Corn Laws and the last time the Tory party split, but the difference here is the Conservative Party, to really split, the majority would have to decide that business wasn't their most important thing, that actually parliamentary sovereignty, judicial sovereignty was more important to the Conservative Party than the needs of business and the economy and prosperity of the country. If that happened, the party would split.
How many people do you think there are in that camp?
In the ideological
that would split, yeah, the ideological camp.
40 or 50.
Yeah. And how many would there be on the middle ground in the Labour Party with similar idealistic views and ambitions? Could you see a new party being formed here on the middle ground?
Oh, well, going in the other direction. I mean, I think, there are clearly probably about 20 committed Labour Party supporters of Brexit at all costs. So there is a group in the House of Commons of maybe 80 to 100 at the absolute maximum who are absolutely at all costs, whatever the cost, get out Brexiteers. But it's not a majority or anything like. Everyone keeps saying there should be a new party. and it would span through everything from George Osborne to Chuka Umunna and the kind of moderate members of the Labour. I really don't see it. We have a first-past-the-post system in this country which is brutally unfriendly to new parties. When the SDP arrived, they had 4 of the best-liked and most famous top-level politicians in the country leading them, the Gang of 4. They had a huge amount of money. They had, in Margaret Thatcher, a Prime Minister who was at that time very, very unpopular, and they had a Labour Party falling to pieces, and they still couldn't make it. Admittedly, there was a small event called the Falklands War, which got in the way, but by and large, they had all the wind at their back, and they could not break the first-past-the-post system. They had great by-elections falling perfectly for them, and they won those, and they went on and on and on, and then they fell flat on their faces. And I think everybody at Westminster remembers that.
So there's no chance in this country, in your view, then, of a kind of Macron situation, because he pretty much got elected on his ideals and then put the whole party machine around after he was elected. That can't happen here because of our system.
Well, first, we don't have anybody in the UK who is as charming as Emmanuel Macron. I've interviewed him twice, and the kind of moist gasps of amazement. And that was the blokes. The women were more extreme than that. We don't have anyone like that in this country, I don't think, at the moment. But secondly, more importantly, we don't have the French presidential system. You need a two-tier presidential system where people will vote in the first round for who they want and vote in the second round against who they're most frightened of winning, for someone like Macron to win. And even in that system, he had a whole series of lucky breaks, opponents who became clearly involved in dodgy business dealings and so forth. And so, in short, we don't have a Macron system and we won't have a Macron.
And just before we sort of move on from the Brexit question, and how long do you think this is going to rumble on? I mean, you said at the beginning, you think it's irreversible, it's going to happen in one way, shape or form. How long do you think the transition period's going to go on? I mean, someone said to me the other day...
Ever and ever and ever. We're going to be here in 50 years' time on our canes with kind of lengthy beards, blind and deaf, still talking about the bloody thing.
Well, someone said to me... Someone said to me last week, and I thought he was joking, so I laughed, and then actually realised he was really serious. He said, Peter, Italy will be out of the EU before we are.
That's certainly possible. I mean, I think what's going to happen is there will be some kind of last-minute fudged arrangement, though I have to say, I think the chances of falling out with no deal are also quite high. And why? Because one of my big frustrations is I get to interview Theresa May. That's not the frustration, I hasten to add, and David Davis and Boris Johnson and all the rest of them. But the EU side never expose themselves to proper questioning. I don't get to talk to Barnier. I don't get to talk to Juncker. I get to talk to Verhofstadt, but most of them refuse to be interviewed, so I am not able to put these questions to them. But it seems to me that whatever the Chequers summit agrees, it'll be really which is the deal that we can take to Brussels to be thrown back in our faces, because they are taking an extremely hardline federalist ideological approach to these talks. We always thought, or Britain always thought, that eventually the European leaders, Merkel and Macron and the rest, would put pressure on the EU to deliver a more sensible, compromise, workable solution. There is no sign of that pressure whatever. Barnier and his team are utterly rigid and refusing to move at all. I think the likeliest reason for there to be a fairly dramatic, I won't use any more words than that, a dramatic no deal falling off the cliff Brexit will be that the EU is so hardline it accepts nothing but total British surrender to its terms. And I think this country will not accept that. And so a no-deal solution is something you should all prepare for and be aware of and be thinking about. It is perfectly possible. However, I think in the end, probably some kind of not terribly satisfactory compromise fudge will be agreed. That won't be completely agreed in March, of course, next year. There'll be then a 2-year transition phase and perhaps long beyond a 2-year transition phase. Some of the Tory Brexiteers think just get out in name only, get out legally, and then we'll have another election. And then eventually, further down the road, we can really reopen all the questions of what aspects of the customs union, what aspects of the single market are we part of and what are we not part of, in which case it just does go on for bloody ever, I'm afraid.
What do you think the biggest issue will be in Chequers next couple of days? Is it the Northern Ireland border? I mean, how do you have a customs arrangement and something separate for Ireland?
The Northern Ireland border matters hugely, but in a way it's only the representation of the even bigger question. Are we sort of in or are we completely out? That's the question. If we are sort of in, then, as I say, life carries on a bit as it is at the moment. Goods continue to flow. There is pretty much frictionless trade. The City of London is not encouraged to start to decamp and all the rest of it. Admittedly, we don't have votes in the European Parliament, but since we've never even noticed that the European Parliament exists, this is perhaps something we could cope with as a country. Or, as I say, we take the big, bold gamble of going out completely. That is the choice. And that's what the Chequers Summit has to do. I think they will do everything they can to avoid that choice, and I think she will come out with a kind of softer end, which won't be accepted by the Brexiteers, and there'll be a huge amount of huffing and puffing and little stampings of feet, but probably in the end, nobody will resign. But if they do, if it's Boris going, the government will live with it. If it's Boris and David Davis, they'll suck their teeth and live with it. If it's Boris and David Davis and Michael Gove, there will be votes in Parliament which may bring down the Prime Minister, and we're into a full-blown political crisis, and I won't be able to go on holiday.
You described very eloquently the significance and the monumental scale of this, but as a historian, Andrew, when the historians of the future look back at this, will this just be a little blip in history, or is this going to be the monumental thing that we think it is now? I mean, this has all happened within sort of half of the reign of our current monarch, for goodness sake, both our time in and possibly our time out as well. How big is it going to be in 100 years' time?
Well, I think the even bigger picture is going to be the struggle in our period of civilization, if you like, putting it pompously, between the big global powers and forces in the world, which tend to be big corporations, mostly at the moment in America, but soon in China, the Amazons, you know Amazon very, very well indeed, and the Googles and the Facebooks and all the rest of it, who are reshaping our lives on the one hand, and, as it were, old-fashioned democratic structures we call countries or nations on the other hand. And the way they interact is very, very important to us, above all when it comes to taxation. Look at our high streets, not just in Britain, but in Italy and France and Germany and America too, and you see the devastation caused on the high streets by the fact that these huge global forces don't feel they have to pay little local taxes anymore, but can get away without it. Then that is the great struggle of our times. It's democratic structures who are trying to raise the money for schools and roads and railways and all the things that require us to get through our daily lives on the one hand, and the great, big, disruptive, vast commercial companies on the other. As I say, at the moment they're American, soon they'll be Chinese. And I think the real challenge for the Brexiteers is how does making the political unit smaller help you take on these big corporations? In the world of Trump and America after Brexit, how easy are we going to find it to make really tough deals with Donald Trump to ensure that Amazon and co. pay their fair share of taxes? How easy are we going to find it to make free trade deals that ensure that British farmers get a fairer deal as farmers in Idaho or Arizona? It's going to be very tough. But the real struggle is between politics on the one hand and big global commerce on the other. And I think Brexit will be seen as a very, very important moment in that struggle.
And the point about taxation, I think, is really relevant to our audience and guests today, because people in this room are now doing what used to happen in the high street. And the rumblings of tax on logistics, if it's a fulfillment business that are serving the customer, there are certain factions that we're hearing within government that would like to put a tax on those organisations. So tax on logistics. And the other thing that's sort of starting to raise its head a little bit at the moment, not just about the business rates on the high street, that's an issue, but actually as a compensating factor for the loss of that revenue, taxing internet sales. I mean, can you see these things taking off?
I can see huge political pressure for it because politicians are desperate for new things to tax. They always are, always have been, but particularly at the moment because they can see revenues coming down post-Brexit and they see the huge pressures on on public sector budgets. That's what I talk about on Sunday mornings, perhaps too often. But, you know, Theresa May finds 20 billion quid down the back of the sofa for the National Health Service, fine. But what about social care? What about our armed forces, which have shrunk really, really radically, and the Americans are now demanding that we spend more? And in many ways, I sympathize with them. I can see exactly why. There are endless pressures on spending, schools, roads, railways, and all the rest of it. So they're looking for things to tax more. But it's obviously, it's the job of this association, I would say, to make the case that this may not be a very sensible thing to do.
We're on it. Just talking about the association and our members here and the logistics industry, Andrew, you did your programme a few years ago now, Britain from Above. It was absolutely fantastic. I don't know who enjoyed that as much as I did. Did you get a sight from that programme of this great logistics industry and these big sheds, as these guys on Table 26 call them? We call them fulfilment centres and centres of logistics excellence, but Table 26 somehow call them sheds.
But with the greatest of respect, I think shed is better than fulfilment centre. There we are.
Now you're paying to the sponsors now.
Yeah, I did. It was a great thing. This was basically an attempt to tell the story of Britain by looking at it from above, and it allowed the BBC, who even at that stage thought I was slightly overpaid, to throw me out of planes and helicopters and see what happened. But surprisingly, I managed to land most times. Yeah, you go over Britain, and the sheer scale of some of the big logistics centres, whether it's on the East Coast, whether it's the Thames Gateway or Felix or whatever, is absolutely astonishing. You go to Milton Keynes, and you see the size of some of these new sheds, and it is unbelievable. And we are clearly moving away from a country which clustered around small historic town centres of oldie-worldy shops and all the rest of it to, as you say, a country which expects our clothes and our food to arrive on 2 wheels or 4 wheels when we expect it, and to be delivered, in my case, to the kitchen table, not just to the front door. That is the new world, and you can see it from above. It's dramatic and it's vivid.
Great. Right, we're conscious of time because we do need to get to lunch. We could sit here and talk all afternoon. It's riveting. We've got some questions from the floor. Just for practicalities, Isabel McCabe of Wojtek. Where's Isabel? Have you got a microphone out there, Isabel? Have you got your question ready? Yes. She's over here. Stand up, Isabel.
So apologies firstly because I'm Scottish, so if the accent's a problem, just someone can interpret it. So 12 months from now, do you think the PM will still be in office? And if not, could Corbyn seriously be running this country?
Okay, so that's the hardest question of the day so far.
I know.
My guess is in 12 months' time she will still be Prime Minister, but she could be gone by Sunday. I mean, it's a very, very fragile situation. There are plenty of people trying to get rid of her, close friends and colleagues inside the party, and there are plenty of people who think that she simply can't take any kind of decisions about anything and therefore must go. I would say that she is one of the most resilient, dogged, tough, indestructible politicians I've met, infuriating a lot of the time. But I quite admire the fact they throw all this shit at her, forgive my language, and she just puts her head down and quietly keeps going. And she's kept going so far, and I think she can keep going for a lot longer, because I think a lot of people on the hard Brexit side of the argument think if we get rid of her, we might get somebody truly ghastly, like Philip Hammond, my God. And on the other side, they think, but it might be Boris. And faced with those two alternatives, Theresa May, to a lot of them, looks like the least bad option. Now, we're not going to get Jeremy Corbyn, obviously, unless there's a general election, and I think the Conservative Party, not yet being quite entirely mad and suicidal, won't call one for a bit. They still hope they'll be able to change leader maybe 6 to 12 months ahead of an election, and by then Brexit will have been dealt with, and the economy will be rising again quite smartly, and the voters will be bored with Corbyn. It's quite interesting, if you look at the satire on television, the satirists are now turning on Corbyn in a way that they wouldn't have dared to a year ago. He's a very, very affable guy. He came into the show about 12 months to 15 months ago, and half the kind of teenage members of the BBC were crowding around him for selfies and autographs, that would not happen now.
They're not members of Momentum.
Well, who knows?
The BBC.
Who knows? Who knows who's a member of Momentum? I was at university with a very, very handsome, golden-haired and very moderate young man called John Landsman, who has now got a huge white beard, is vastly fat, and has created Momentum. I don't know what happened. And if you ask what happened in the interim, the answer is Tony Benn. He fell under the spell of Tony Benn. So I know quite a lot about Momentum. But no, my main point is that a lot of Tories are waiting for the shine to come off Jeremy Corbyn. And they think it's in their interest to delay an election till the appropriate moment, which is 2022. And therefore, I think there won't be one until then, unless they are so maddened and enraged with each other, they tear the whole thing down. And that's still possible. It's very hot out there. It's the Spectator party tonight. There'll be a lot of warm Prosecco. People will go a bit bonkers. There'll be fantastic headlines in Friday's papers. Never mind the weekend, I promise.
Great, let's do another question from the floor. Dino Rockus from John Lewis. Where's Dino? Over here.
Really understand the reality of what that means in UK PLC. The logistics function and organisations cannot operate and cannot support UK PLC. We can only have one impact. Are we at the stage where some of the wishful thinking starts to be replaced with a much more balanced, fact-based conversation?
Well, I'd like to say that the answer was yes, but my true answer is fat chance. I don't see much sign of it at the moment. I think if I was channeling the hardcore Brexit view inside the party, it would be, yes, there's going to be a bit of a bump, but it will do you all a power of good. You'll have to automate much more dramatically, and as when New Zealand suddenly withdrew the subsidies for New Zealand farmers and automated and created one of the most globally successful agricultural businesses in the world, the same will happen to us. So in other words, they think there'll be a lot of squealing and a lot of damage, but eventually it'll be better. Now, I'm not going to say what my view is. I'm saying that's what they would say to you now, I think. There's a big range of the Conservative Party, as I've said, which takes exactly the opposite view, of course. And when, was it Boris Johnson said, it's usually Boris Johnson, so that's safe enough. When Boris Johnson said that the Treasury was the heart of Remain, I think he was speaking to a certain amount of truth. Not Remain, but the heart of soft Brexit. I think those worries about business, those worries about employment, those worries about what's going to happen when we end the free flow of people and in due course goods, that is all being heard in the Trade Department, the Treasury, and they are working flat out to persuade other departments of their case. And that really is the politics going on behind this Chequers meeting. Theresa May is meeting lots of her cabinet colleagues right now, yesterday and tomorrow, ahead of the Chequers meeting. And the ones that she is meeting who have been absorbing the arguments of the Treasury are beginning to come round. That's why I think she's a very cautious woman, and she would not be heading towards the softer end of Brexit at the moment if she didn't think that's where the numbers were.
This vote was largely about immigration, wasn't it? I mean, that was for the man in the street. But that's the biggest issue that's hitting our industry at the moment, is the Brexodus. I think that's what Dino was referring to. In a highly automated facility, I must say, they still have major issues getting labour into their organisation.
Well, it's very interesting. When specific issues are raised with government, they tend to change direction. So when the whole problem of Tier 2 visas for trained doctors, because we're so short of doctors in the NHS, was raised, then Theresa May, who's been very, very steely on this issue, changed course. And Now we're hearing the same arguments raised about other sectors, about the high-tech sector, and so on. So I think when a specific problem is raised, you are not going to get the raspberry crop in next year unless, or you're not going to be able to make these warehouses work unless government does listen, because then it's specific, it's a part of the country, somebody's constituency, somebody's business going down, and that's when they listen, but right at the end.
Couple more before we go to lunch. Gary Byrne, Panasonic. Gary out there somewhere? Here he is.
Hi.
There's a microphone behind you, Gary, I think.
Hi, Andrew. There seems to be a lot of talk around British politics, Brexit, in-party fighting, things like that. I'd like to understand what you think about what's the norm for Europe, because there seems to be a lot of anti-establishment, Macron rising, Merkel struggling, Italy and Spain, lots of changes. What's your thought on what should be the norm going forward?
Well, we heard just now about, quite rightly, about immigration and labour flows as the big question. We're quite close to the point where mass migration across the Mediterranean is destroying the European Union. The election of the new Italian government, the Five-Star and Northern League government, with an avowedly anti-immigration, put up the borders agenda, what's going on in Austria, what's going on in Hungary under Orban. These people are breaking not just European rules, but they're breaking the whole European philosophy of free movement. And so I think the EU is facing huge strains. It was a matter of absolute nip and tuck that Angela Merkel survived as German Chancellor this week. And looking ahead, it's not certain that she's out of the woods yet, because the deal she has struck means the Austrians are trying to put up a border between themselves and the Germans. And again, that is against the entire spirit of the EU. And whether the EU allows that to happen is not clear, and whether she can survive is not clear. It's very easy to sit here and think about Brexit, and that's what we do on the Andrew Marr Show. Ad nauseum, I know, I apologise, but it is the biggest issue facing us. But it's important to remember that right across the continent of Europe, there are other political crises, certainly in Italy at the moment, continuing in Greece, in Germany, all over the place. You are getting popular revolt against the sense that people are coming from somewhere over there and possibly taking my job, or at least taking a similar job at a lower wage, and where's it going to end? And the pressures of the old social democratic societies when it comes to housing, education, and welfare are very, very tough at the moment. I think we are living through a global period, well, not global, but a period of populism across the West, from the States to the EU and beyond. And it's a question of battening down the hatches and which countries have political systems robust enough and resilient enough to survive these storms. I think we're one of them, actually.
Let's go to Leslie Batchelor, OBE. Leslie's the Director General of the Institute of Export and International Trade.
Thank you. That's quite an introduction. Thank you, Peter. And I've got a question, well, several really, I suppose. So first of all, you know, if Donald Trump goes ahead, will you be interviewing him first? And then also, as America First is beginning to take shape, how do you think the rather protectionist measures are beginning to work, and how are they really going to impact on us as UK? And furthermore, is this really the brink of a world war on trade?
All right, to take those in order, as you said them, Donald Trump will not be interviewed by Andrew Marr or anybody else from the BBC, he has said. He prefers his friends, Fox and Friends, Piers Morgan, perhaps Nigel Farage on LBC. He doesn't. He likes interviewers who are going to stroke, and we will. And there would be no stroking from me, so that's not going to happen. Second, when it comes to America First and Trump's attitude towards free trade, I am just slightly baffled why we as a country think this is a good time to go out into the world and strike a deal with one of the most steely and aggressive protectionists we have seen since the Second World War. I don't think it's going to end well. I may be wrong, but what confuses me even more is that so many of people advocating this course are friends and admirers of Donald J. Trump. What is going on? Don't they know what he's like? Haven't they spoken to him about free trade? Now, they may think that he doesn't really mean it, that the Rust Belt can be continually fooled about these great numbers of jobs coming back from China, coming back from Mexico. I don't think that's right. I think he understands the anger there is so raw and so angry. Those voters, those core white Republican voters in the flyover states, as they call them in the state, simply want somebody who bellows and is angry and sounds like he's on their side. And it's going to play very well for him. And by the way, I think he'll win next time as well.
Wow. One more question from the floor. Abby McGuffey, just bear with me. Where's Abby McGuffey of Peel Ports?
I'm here.
Oh, hi, Abby.
Hello.
Go on, fire your question into Andrew.
Yeah, having heard that David Dimbleby is stepping down as presenter on Question Time, are you going to apply for his job?
I've got a better job already. I've got more viewers. I've seen off 3 ITV shows so far. I'm looking forward to the next person who, like Robert Peston, said he was going to come and humiliate the BBC by taking us on, and then they have to take them off the schedule. So no, I'm very, very happy where I am. I think David Dimbleby, by the way, is one of the absolute gods of broadcasting. I've sat beside him during general election results nights and referendum results nights, and because we share the same earpiece system, I can hear what's going into his ear. All the people having nervous breakdowns, screaming, saying, you know, we've lost Worcester. Don't go to Worcester now. Go to the whole time, and he's completely imperturbable and relaxed and in charge, and I couldn't do it. It's a very, very hard thing to do. So he is a very big loss to the BBC. Personally, I hope we get a woman to do the show, because I think it's about time, but it certainly won't be me. Transitioned or not.
Okay.